I am Darius, the great king, the king of kings, the king of Persia, the king of the provinces, the son of Hystaspes, the grandson of Arsames, the Achaemenid. Thus saith Darius the king, My father is Hystaspes. The father of Hystaspes was Arsames. The father of Arsames was Ariaramnes. The father of Ariaramnes was Thyspes. The father of Thyspes was Achaemenes. On that account are we called Achaemenid. From antiquity are we descended. From antiquity hath our race been kings. 8 of my race were kings before me. I am the 9th. In 2 lines have we been kings. By the grace of our Mazda am I king. Our Mazda hath granted me the kingdom. These are the provinces which are subject unto me, and by the grace of our Mazda became I king of them: Persia, Susiana, Babylonia, Assyria, Arabia, Egypt, the islands of the sea, Sparta, Ionia, Armenia, Cappadocia, Parthia, Drangania, Aria, Chorasmia, Bactria, Sogdiana, Gandhara, Scythia, Satyhidia, Arachosia, and Makkah, 23 lands in all. These are the provinces which are subject unto me. By the grace of our Mazda they became subject unto me. They brought tribute unto me. Whatsoever commands have been laid on them by me by night or by day have been performed by them. Within these lands, whosoever was a friend, him have I surely protected. Whosoever was hostile, him have I utterly destroyed. By the grace of our Mazda these lands have conformed to my decrees, even as it was commanded unto them by me, so was it done. Our Mazda hath granted unto me this empire. Our Mazda brought me help until I gained this empire. By the grace of our Mazda do I hold this empire.
Hello and welcome everybody. We're back for another reading of The Great Exodus, or The Time of the End. How near are we to it? A book by James Aiken Wylie, written a long time ago. We're probably 150 years or so. I don't know what the math is right now. It's too early in the morning for me to do this math because, I'm a mathematical kind of mind, but right now, just waking up, and we are going to do some reading and discussion of this work that we had done last time. On page 181 of the book, we were talking about the Rock of Behishtim. Is that correct? Did I pronounce that correct, Jörg?
That is correct, yeah.
Yeah, very, very interesting discussion we had last time. And Michael is with us as well, so welcome, Michael. Great to have you with us today.
Hi, Bret. I'm glad that I could make it on time, and so I'm looking forward to learn anything new about history, real history, of course. And thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, I just want to say a little something for our listeners. If you're new to these broadcasts and discussions, you found something very unique here that you practically cannot find on the internet, I would imagine. And, subjects related to these books and these writings are increasingly rare, I think, and even any discussions about them, because this is not the average book we're looking at right here, is it now, Jörg?
No, because this is a book that is not even on the official list. When you go check the author, James Atkin Wylie, on the internet, you will not even find this book, The Great Exodus. It is
Yes.
probably written in 1862, so that's a little bit over 150 years if the counting and if the publication date that we found on the book actually is all right, because first we thought it was something in the 1590s or even posthum published, but it seemed to be from 1862. The point is, there are a few writers like James Atkin Wylie, Henry Grattan Guinness, and I also like to count in there Charles Henry Spurgeon, writers and prolific reverends, as I like to call them, from the 19th century that are there, but that was a dying breed already at that time. You don't have many people who carried on the fire, if you can say it like this without any Gnostic reference, carried on the lamp, let's call it then, the oil lamp, then there's no discussion about that, of the wisdom of the Bible and of the wisdom of who is the biblical and prophetical and historical Antichrist. You almost don't find anyone anymore in the 20th century, let alone the 21st century. Those people are getting more and more scarce with the day. And this book deals with the subject, as you already said, Bret, that is, very easy viewed over, means overseen, means people don't recognize it. It speaks of the captivity of the church, and that on a period of 2,520 days. It speaks of the great exodus after that captivity of 7 times. And of course, we all are familiar with the captivity of 3.5 times, because it was mentioned, among others, in the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation, about a time, times, and half a time, about 42 months, about 3.5 years, about 1,260 days. But very rarely you read anything about the 2,520 days, and this is the subject that James Atkin Wylie keeps himself busy with in this book. It is very interesting, but because probably our listeners have not heard about this before, we have not, almost not heard about it before. I think there was a little mentioning of this in Albert Close's book, The Divine Program of the World's History, that we read in between the 2 parts that we are going to read this book. But for the rest, also for us, that is an unknown. So the special thing about this book reading for you listener is that you will not get a book reading with a complete explanation of every word or every page, comments of me or of Bret or of Michael here and there, that can explain into detail what exactly the author is referring to, because also we are on the search. We are still looking for the whole truth that this book is going to reveal us in collaboration with the Bible, of course, because it is only the Bible and the Bible alone that bears the word of God and that bears the only truth in this world. And James Atkin Wylie is just trying to make sense of many things out of the Bible and try to explain it to us about the captivity of the church in the 7 times. So we are going into this now, and this is why Bret mentioned that this is a very special reading, even for us, because it is something different from the readings that we do otherwise, and we still have 230 pages ahead of us. So I suggest that I just start, except of course for Bret or Michael having any comments on what I just said here.
That's beautiful. That's a really good way to put it, Jörg. And you know, I recently, a couple weeks ago, I did a little video by myself out there by the wildlife here.
I saw that one. Yeah,
on the broken pieces of our walk with our Lord. You know, we're trying to put back these pieces. They've been fragmented, and I think there's a reason behind that. I think that the Lord is drawing us to this message because there's so little recognition of what happened in the past in terms of the church and this captivity that we're enduring now. So very good, Jörg. Let's just go right into it. And Michael, do you have anything to add?
No. I'm just waiting to start.
Okay, great.
Good. Here we go. A document of remarkable kind and one coeval with Darius himself has just the other day been brought to light. Speaking of course, of the mid-19th century. This document throws fresh interest and intelligence upon the prophecy we are considering. We refer to the graven rock of Behistun, which we spoke about in our last recording of this book, where we went into the article of Wikipedia, as you can see here, Behistun inscription, and we explained, or tried to explain, of what importance the rock of Behistun is, because it was compared to the Rosetta Stone. And the Rosetta Stone gave the possibility, quote-unquote possibility, because, I haven't read that stone, I haven't studied Egyptology, I don't know what everything they say is right, but they say that the Rosetta Stone gave the possibility to analyze the hieroglyphs of the Egyptians, and by that get a much better understanding of the Egyptians and their life. And the Behistun inscription, or the Behistun rock, that we talked about, gave a lot of the old writings understanding that all of a sudden we understand all these old writings that were in that stone, because there were 3 languages in that stone. I don't remember which languages anymore. You can look that up on the Wikipedia article. And because of that, we understood much of that history much better than we do now. But I have to say, I say we, but I don't actually mean we. I only mean the people who studied this, people who are really archaeologists, who really study these ancient languages and who have a knowledge of this. We, and I mean the we now, me, Jörg, Michael, and Bret, and you on the screen, we whether trust these persons that they say the correct things, or we don't trust them. Since I like to put my trust rather in God than in man, I always do that with a question mark, but I think that someone learned, like James Atkin Wylie, when he speaks about this, he knows and he takes something that is good from it, means he takes the good and he takes out the bad from this teaching. So he continues to say that rock remained unread for ages, an idle wonder as it seemed, for little did men dream what record it bore, till the other year that Mr. Rawlinson deciphered it, and found it to be a history of the wars of Darius, graven by the order of Darius himself. From that record it appears that Darius Hystaspes fought 19 battles, conquered 9 kings, and compelled their nations to submission to his yoke. What a picture of the pushing of the ram westward, northward, and southward, and victorious on all sides, quote, so that no beasts might stand before him, neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will, and became great, unquote. This record Providence has preserved to our day, as if to authenticate his own prophecy, and lead us with his own finger to the right interpretation of it. And in the footnote we read, the inscription is a trilingual one, as I said, 3 languages in there. The reader may see it in full in Rawlinson's Herodotus, Volume 2. The more material portions are given by Dr. Keith on his history of and destiny of the world and the church. There is no mention of India in the Behistun tablet, but it occurs on the platform as Persepolis. As if still farther to indicate the connection of Darius Hystaspes with the vision of cleansing, the literal temple at Jerusalem was in his reign reconsecrated. It was this king of Persia who granted the Jews permission to resume the building stopped by the opposition of the Samaritans, and in BC 516 the temple was finished and solemnly dedicated.
May I add something?
Please, sure.
Persepolis, Jörg, you and me, we had discovered Persepolis when we are doing gender agenda studies, where they have worshipped the so-called Huma bird last last time. So that was an ancient pagan temple of worship with many birds on these columns, and so.
Yeah, I remember that picture of these different columns that were there,
Yeah.
and this bird that is related to the phoenix, wasn't it?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was an interesting one. But the people, of course, do not know about our gender reading because it's in German only, and we are here on the English videos. But Michael and I, especially Michael, I just sat there listening. Michael makes a video series on my YouTube channel that speaks about the gender agenda in the beginning and turns over to be an expose of the satanic music agenda in the world. And we are taking on one rock group and musical group after another. And sometimes it even takes us 7 or 8 hours to do over one group, especially the last one was Queen. And the last song, Bohemian Rhapsody, was 3 hours alone, and that is what Michael is referring to. So when you are familiar with the German language, go to my second YouTube channel, Joggler's War on Disinfo, and check out the gender agenda videos, and you know what Michael here is talking about.
Yeah, I was just remembering the part with the Persepolis because there was a very interesting picture of the Huma bird, which consists of Hu, which means spirit, and Ma, which means in Arabic water. So that man is both consisting of spirit and water, or spirit and body.
Yeah. And spirit and water is, of course, something interesting in regard to the Bible, because we have to be born again of the Spirit by divulging under the water, right? So even some truths in heathenism? Question mark? Well, all right, let's just go on with this book. And it's very interesting because, you know, after this little paragraph here, I already could ask a few questions. I'm going to do that in my own study, in my own time. But the point is, of course, the 2,300-day prophecy again. From Daniel chapter 8, verse 14. Is that 2,300 days, literal days, or is that 2,300 years? First glance, it must be years because it is in a prophecy. And normally in a prophecy, days are years. But there is also another possibility, and I learned that some time ago, that it is connected with the book of Ezra, with the re-establishment of the temple in this time, and then the cleansing. And this is what we are speaking about here. Vision of cleansing. Yeah, this is Daniel chapter 8, verse 14, where that refers to. So let me read it again, that you can keep that fact in mind, and then on this regard, start your own studies on that to gain a better understanding. Yeah?
I just want to mention that also in astrology, there is 1 day for a year prophecy. So it all comes out of the Chaldeans. Of course, it comes from Babylonian, from the pagan priesthoods there. But actually, it's the same thing around. It's just 1 day for 1 year.
Okay. Thank you for that information. So I'm going to repeat this little paragraph here. As if still farther to indicate the connection of Darius Hystaspes with the vision of cleansing, meaning the connection of Darius Hystaspes with Daniel chapter 8 verse 14, the literal temple at Jerusalem was in his reign reconsecrated. It was this king of Persia who granted the Jews permission to resume the building stopped by the opposition of the Samaritans, and in BC 516 the temple was finished and solemnly dedicated. Now, let us come to the conclusion which all these facts that we read in this chapter enable us to draw. In the foreground of the vision stands conspicuously the ram, pushing victoriously towards the west, and towards the north, and towards the south. History is a faithful reflection of prophecy, God having taken care that whatever is prominent in the one should be equally prominent in the other. Whether it be the pages of Herodotus and Diodorus Siculus, or the graven rock at Behistun, silent so long, silent no longer. It is the ram that is seen pushing victoriously at this era, just as the prophet saw him. One year is specially noted by historians as the year when all these great expeditions, which lasted till the very close of this reign, were fairly initiated, and that is the year 508 BC. If, from the year before Christ 508, we count the 2,300 years of the vision, we are brought down to the year 1792, as the year when the sanctuary would be justified and the initiative taken in its cleansing. But this, we have already shown, is the year when the 7 times run out and the judgment sits. In the footnote we read, for the facts on which the conclusions of this chapter are founded, the author has consulted Wilkinson's Herodotus Volumes 2 and 3 and Diodorus Siculus' work Prideaux Volume 1 and 2 other works that I don't need to mention. You can read that for yourself. So the point is, and this is the only kind of comment that I'm going to give here, when we take the year 508 BC as the starting point of the 2300-day year prophecy, the ending year would be 1792. That is the year of the starting or the culmination of the French Revolution, and has nothing to do with the Seventh-day Adventist teaching of 1844. They take another starting year. Now the question is, are you listening to the Seventh-day Adventists and their teaching? Or are you taking an independent scholar like James Atkin Wylie, like Albert Close, who speaks about the same period, and like Henry Gretton Guinness, who probably speaks about the same period, who has no affiliation with the Seventh-day Adventists? That's the question you have to answer for yourself. Did the sanctuary then begin to be cleansed? In 1792 we find, amid social convulsions and political terrors, French Revolution, a double process of cleansing beginning in the Western Christendom. A storm gathers suddenly over the area of the Fourth Kingdom. It bursts in unexampled fury, but mark where its violence falls. It falls on the very dynasties and hierarchies which had persecuted the saints. Europe, the 10 kingdoms the old pagan Roman Empire fell into, and the papal kingdom continued to represent. The despotic thrones and idolatrous altars of the papal world were shaken by the earthquake and shivered by the lightnings of that storm, preparatory to their being swept altogether out of existence. The sentence of desolation was lifted off from the church and laid upon the world power. The desolating agent began itself to be made desolate. Contemporaneously with this process of destruction, we can trace a process of re-edification. At this era we founded those great evangelistic institutions in Britain and in America, which have ever since been carrying the Bible and the Gospel to every accessible part of the continent of Europe and of the world, speaking of the Bible societies that started in those times. The same hour that saw the armies of the Revolution go forth to inflict upon the papal nations the ravages of war, saw also the first missionaries go forth to preach the gospel of peace to the nations. The same whirlwinds that swept away the abominations of Christendom made a way for the light to shine again into that sanctuary which popish error had so long darkened and popish violence had trampled underfoot. Now, I have to say, we already read this part, and we are going to read this now for the second time. And I have to tell you that now for the second time that I read this, all of a sudden I understand what is standing here. It equivocates the fall of the Roman Empire in France with the French Revolution, with the bringing out of the gospel more or less worldwide in the next few years. and I'm speaking of the next, let's say, 60, 70 years, maybe even more. We only have to reconsider 1870 when the false Bibles came to show up. But in the meantime, not only the false Bibles were taught to the world, but all Bibles were taught to the world. With the starting of the Bible societies at the end of the 18th, beginning of the 19th century, and the missionaries that go forth to preach the gospel in all nations, doesn't that remind you of the text that we can read in the book of Revelation, where it says, "And you have to go another time and preach the gospel and preach what's in the book to all nations"? I don't know where in Revelation exactly this stands right now, because I know what stands in the Bible, what is written in the Bible, not all of course, but I know a lot of it, but I cannot tell you book, chapter or verse. I am not that literate. You can look that up for yourself. I just tell you, in the book of Revelation, when John is given the book, and it is sweet on the mouth and it is heavy in his stomach, it is said that this has to be taught, the gospel has to be taught again. It was taught again in the first time of the first church in the beginning, in the first century, and it is now being to be taught again, and that was here in the 19th century. This is at least how I understand this from the context that we are reading this right here, right now. Maybe my two brothers have a kind of have a remark on that.
Very good, Jörg. Yeah, I agree.
So this could be then that in the Revelation, this part speaks of the beginning of the 19th century. The same whirlwinds that swept away the abominations of Christendom, yeah, that was the rule of the Roman Catholic Church in France by the French Revolution. Those same whirlwinds made a way for the light to shine again into the sanctuary, which popish error had so long darkened, and popish violence had trampled underfoot. Thus, amid the dark clouds of judgment, a spiritual temple was seen to rise, beauteous and fair, upon the old foundations. Doesn't the Bible say that we are the temple of God? They shall build the old wastes. They shall raise up the former desolations, and they shall repair the waste cities, the desolations of many generations. This is how chapter 12 ends, and then we go into the next chapter, 13. That is called the 3 times and a half, or third chronological line. 3 times and a half. So now we are speaking of the half of the 7 times. It remains, says the author, it remains that we trace the third chronological line to its terminating point. Provided we shall find that it converges on the same era on which the 7 times and the 2300 days so manifestly converge, that, in short, we are set down a 3rd time at the foot of the great throne expected for the judgment of the world power. Then one very important epoch we may regard as having been ascertained with considerable probability, or rather, we ought to say, certainty. Big difference between probability and certainty. The scheme of prophecy will begin to gather shape before our eyes. The order of God's eternal plan as regards His church in time will still more unfold itself. And our object in these discussions is not so much to fix the date of particular epochs, as to reveal their progression and onward march to the high end contemplated from eternity. We humbly aim at following the stately steps of God, to us so unfathomable, oh man, I know that word, I can't pronounce it, sorry, but some things, there's a knot in my tongue or something. We humbly aim at following the stately steps of God, to us so unfathomable.
That's okay. It's kind of got a rhythm to it, you know. There's another word.
Yeah, if you say it once, I can probably repeat it 10 times, no problem.
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
Unfathomable.
Unfathomable.
There you go.
In themselves so holy and wise, and which, without pause, without deflection even, with unfaltering purpose and steady, irresistible advance through the dispensations shrouded in this hour in terror, and the next beaming with unchangeable loving kindness and truth, have been conducting the Church from the beginning right onwards to her long predicted goal, quote, the kingdom and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven, unquote. The third and shortest line of the three is mentioned for the first time in the 7th chapter of Daniel, the 25th verse. Oppressed by the vision of the 4 great beasts, which seemed to him to portend an era of trouble to the Church, running far into the future and culminating in an epoch of fearful calamity, he came near unto one of them, quote, that stood by and asked him the truth of all this, unquote. The person so interrogated interpreted to him the meaning of the first 3 beasts. But Daniel would know, quote, the truth of the 4th beast, which was diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful, unquote. Especially he would know the interpretation of his, quote-unquote, 10 horns, and above all, of, quote, the other that came up after them, before whom 3 fell, unquote. This horn riveted his attention, was unmistakably and broadly distinguished from the others. It had eyes like a man, a mouth that spake very great things, a look more stout than his fellows, and a relentless...
Sorry, Yerk, I think you missed a sentence here. Was
its characteristics. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, from its to it. Sorry.
Yep.
Yeah. I have to sip another sip of my coffee or so. What is this today?
Oh, please do. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Sometimes it happens that I just miss.
Oh, it's no problem. You know, it's a learning curve. The English language. There's also another word that you pronounced as certain. It's actually pronounced ascertain.
Yeah.
Yes.
I always know
you know that
afterwards.
already, I suppose.
Afterwards, I always know that, but when I read it, I pronounce it wrong.
I do it too. Yeah, I can do that too. It's easy enough to do.
Ascertain. Yeah. Okay. Its characteristics gave the worst angry of its doings. It had eyes like a man, a mouth that spake very great things, a look more stout than its fellows, and a relentless malignity that incited it to make war with the saints, till taken in the act, as it were, by the coming of the Ancient of Days. These symbols indicated most surely to the eye of the prophet the possession on the part of the quote-unquote horn of a profound policy and craft, a superhuman pride, a daring blasphemy, and a cruel and bloodthirsty disposition. In short, they stamped the horn as eminently the enemy of God and the persecutor of his saints. Footnote: this horn was a kingdom of a different kind from the other kingdoms, having a life or soul peculiar to itself, with eyes and a mouth. By its eyes it was a seer, by its mouth, speaking great things, it was a prophet as well as a king. And such a seer, a prophet and a king, is the Church of Rome. Sir Isaac Newton, on his view on Daniel chapter 7. Daniel had full information given him on that part of the vision that appertained to the horn, though only the briefest explanations of the other parts. Amongst other intimations, I wanted to say intimidations, no. Amongst other intimations, Daniel is definitely told the term of the domination of this blasphemous and persecuting power, as we can read in Daniel chapter 5, Daniel 5:25. quote, "They, the saints, shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time." I'm sorry. I feel for the moment like I'm in an English lesson in school, and I'm sitting there in front of all the guys and have to read.
Oh, we
Because
really appreciate you doing the reading, Yerk.
I didn't prepare the reading. I didn't have the time. And
No doubt.
I think you can hear that, huh?
Well, that's how I would do it too. I think I'm probably 4 times worse, though. It's just the nature of what should we say? Assessing new territory, maybe. The territory of words, the expression that James Aiken Wylie is trying to give us. This isn't a really easy lesson here.
No, it's not.
No. This is very difficult, and that's one of the reasons we went through this little book by Albert Close, The Divine Program of the World's History, is to kind of get some territory exploration done before we get back into this book. And I think it really fits really well. I've been listening to some of these recordings we did recently, and putting them up online. And it just, the amount of understanding that has been lost in 100 years is just incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
And this is the evidence we went through in the Divine Program of the World's History, the evidence of this Protestant view of Christendom. And what do our Protestant churches care about it today?
Nothing.
It seems so, Yerk. It really does. It really seems that way, doesn't it?
They just preach a little bit the love gospel or the prosperity gospel, but they don't preach anything of true
there's
divine
so
messages.
much information about the books of the Bible and the histories behind them, and all the different troubles that our people have been throughout all the centuries, and culminating into this last century, or who knows? I shouldn't say last century, because we don't know what the future has in store. We have no idea what the Lord has planned. And, it just seems like that we're in the last years, the last moments, the last seconds, maybe. I don't know. It just seems that way. It could be, but none of us know the day or the hour. It says right there in Matthew, was it 25, I think? Or wait, let's see. Let me get that.
As you know, I'm not so well with stating what book, chapter, and verse it stands, but it says nobody knows the day or the hour except the Father who is heaven. Not the Son, no man, right. Not even the Son himself knows. Yeah, that's the point. Yeah, when I was in the church, when I was young, I was in a Protestant church until I was 14, because then I got this quote-unquote confirmation party there, and therefore you were obliged Sundays to sit in the pews and listen to the pastor. I always sat there and I wished it was over so that I could leave again. But if the pastor would have spoken about things that I'm reading here, I would have wanted to have it prolonged to be sitting there and asking not to come back next week, but maybe even the next day, because this is so interesting teaching. The Bible is such a wonderful work, and the teaching of God is such a wonderful thing. It is just completely wrong brought over by the people who call themselves the pastors of this world, who call themselves the ones who are, quote-unquote, by their studying, how can you say that, prepared to teach others. And they don't teach anything. They don't teach anything of the Bible. They don't teach anything of real history measured at the Bible. When Bible prophecy says this and this will happen, and Bible prophecy speaks of terms of 2,520 days, 2,300 days, 1,203 score days, no pastor ever takes that in his mouth. I mean, not that I have ever heard of life, When I was live in the church, I never heard anybody say about that. They only taught ribberish.
Yep.
They could have spoken in tongues for all I care. Didn't understand a word anything. Anyway, nothing biblical in there. So, did you find your space that you were looking for there in Matthew something?
Well, it's in Mark too. I never knew that. In Mark 13:32, but the day and the hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels which are in heaven, neither the Son, but the Father. Only. Yeah, that's in Matthew too, but I can't find the one in Matthew right now. Of course. That's
some things
typical.
in Matthew are mirrored in Luke, and some things in Matthew are mirrored in Mark, and this.
Oh,
is
it's
how we
the
know.
search criteria. I'll tell you. I'm sure of that.
Yeah, this
It's
is how
just-
we know that all these books go together, and they are speaking
Yeah.
of the same thing, but they do it from a different point of view. And
That's important too, because we need to have 2 or 3 witnesses, right?
yeah,
Everything
right.
is done with 2 or 3 witnesses. It says in the Bible.
well, the Bible provided for the gospel 4 witnesses: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Huh?
Oh, that's true. Yeah, true. And what preacher behind the pulpit ever talks about continuity in the Bible? The Bible being one unit, one continuous circuit that flows current from the very beginning in Genesis 1:1 to the very end in Revelation 25, is it? I forget when the end of the Bible is, but
Revelation 22. But
22.
I think they always teach all the Old Testament is done away with. We are living under the New Covenant.
well, no, but there's continuity from the Old Covenant to the New Covenant. That's my point, is that if we taught... See, that's
I was
the
joking,
problem.
Brett. Of course you
I
are
know,
right.
but
of
the
course you are
problem
correct
here,
with that.
the problem here is that people get so taken away with their pride in dealing with the gospel, and we shouldn't be prideful at all about the gospel, because we're talking about salvation here for the young and the old, for everybody. And it's not to put weight on self at all. We have to be better at being selfless, which is super hard to do, because it's just the nature of our flesh that we are very selfish, and we have a lot of problems with this. So, yeah, I mean, I think now that we've done a little bit of these studies, that we can see how much weight is, sitting there on high above us. If we're going to be members of the low church, we got to learn how to be low, not high. Got to learn how to be low. We need humility. We need to respect others, be patient, forgive. These are hard things to do when someone insults you.
Yeah, that's because the high church is an invention of the Roman Catholic Church, like the high mass and all that stuff. Everything that's high, that's always self-elevating, that is always Roman Catholicism.
Yeah, and these
to do with humble Christianity.
These quote-unquote Protestants have been forced to take this poison into their pulpits, and they've been shoving it down our throats for centuries, and we got to get over it.
Yeah, because they have chosen to listen to their pastor instead of listen to their Bible.
Yeah, 3 unclean spirits like frogs, it says in the book of Revelation. That's what we're dealing with on all fronts and every corner of Christendom. So, enough said.
Protestantism would never have happened if the people were not given the Bible in their own language. So they were given the Bible in their own language. Yeah, they were given the Bible in their own language in the 16th century, and from that time on, later on, they threw it away. They don't use it anymore. If people were using the Bible as they used them in the first time they got it, we wouldn't live in the world we live in today. But people are gullible, and they want to be betrayed.
It seems that way. It seems that can be the case. That is true. That is true. In general, when you have these quote unquote masses of people, you know, that the quote unquote masses of people will gravitate one way or the other. You have herds of sheep and you have herds of goats. As far as I understand it, there's only sheep and there's only goat. The problem is that everyone thinks everyone's a sheep and you're ignoring the goats. That's what I can't stand about, you know, calling people sheeple and stuff like that. You're not being biblical at all. You're being very worldly. That's a problem.
And even
But anyway,
even the sheep don't listen to the voice of their shepherd.
yeah, exactly. Backsliding Israel, eh?
Mm-hmm.
Speaks about that in Isaiah and Jeremiah quite a bit. Now, how about preaching about that? Isn't that important too? Isn't that the old covenant? Isn't the old covenant important? I think it is. I think it's very important. I think it's what we call fundamental.
Well, as you said in the beginning, this is a unity. The Bible is a book that unites the Old and the New Testament into one big story, and you cannot have the one without the other. But we are taught in this world that the one is done away with, like the law is done away with, nailed to the cross and all that bullshit.
Yep, that's right. That's
and that
right.
we are living now under a new covenant. The covenant of Aleister Crowley. Do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And when you go to heaven, when you knock on heaven's door, like these Led Zeppelin or was it sang that? Knocking on heaven's door.
Yeah.
It will be opened. It will be opened, and you can jump right in. You know, because
Bob
everyone's
Dylan.
good. No, it's
Bob
not Bob
Dylan
Dylan.
came from Minnesota, where I live. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
but he didn't sing "Knocking on Heaven's Door."
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I forget who wrote the song. Was it him?
I don't know. This is a question Michael could answer.
Yeah, I know that Bob Dylan wrote it, so I was a little bit concerned about Led Zeppelin because Led Zeppelin has performed "Stairway to Heaven."
Ah, Stairway to Heaven. Oh,
and
yeah.
Then, Guns N' Roses sang.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. I'm mixing that up. I meant Stairway to Heaven.
It's no problem. But
Okay,
actually,
cool.
Bob Dylan has written "Knocking on Heaven's Door," if I'm correct. And I'm just looking it up. I'm looking it up.
And Guns N' Roses performed that also.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I used to make fun of Guns N' Roses all the time because that lead singer is he's just destroying his voice.
Rose.
Yeah, just destroying his voice. And so many of these quote unquote rock and rollers, they just sit up there and they use the most obscene ways of using the voice, you know. And yeah, I mean, what do you expect is going to come? What kind of fruit is going to become of this world when you promote garbage like this?
Yeah, but I can assure you the good news is that Bob Dylan cannot write these songs anymore.
That's right. That's right. He said so in an interview. That time has passed.
Yeah.
And by the way, time, that brings us back to the book. So let's continue in the book and go on for a few minutes. A time and times and the dividing of time are 3 times and a half. But let us mark that 3 times and a half are just the half of 7 times. But 7 times are the grand trunk line of chronological prophecy. They embrace, as we have said, the whole period of the reign and domination of the idolatrous principle, meaning the captivity of the church, right? From its ascendancy at the beginning of the church's captivity to the sitting of the judgment at the time of the end. But we are here given distinctly to understand that, during that half of the 7 times that precedes the sitting of the judgment, the saints are to be given into the hands of the papal horn. If so, it follows undeniably that as the church is to be tyrannized over by the idolatrous power throughout the whole of the 7 times, she will be oppressed during the first half of the 7 times by idolatry in the form of paganism, and during the last half by idolatry in the form of popery. This teaches us to expect some great and palpable change, not upon the essential nature, but upon the outer form of idolatry at the middle of the 7 times. We say a change, not upon the inner or essential principle. There has never been but one idolatry on the earth, just as there has never been but one gospel upon the earth. As the gospel of the old dispensation was essentially the same gospel with that of the new, nice how we read about what we just spoke about, right? Only now the gospel is more fully developed and is better understood and more clearly seen in its spiritual character and relations. So we have never had but one idolatry upon the earth, for the popery of modern Europe is the same essential idolatry with the paganism of Greece and Rome. Only in these latter days it is more fully developed and has become a subtler, or, if you will, a more spiritual system. But the prophecy bids us expect a change upon its outer form and points to the middle of the 7 times as the time when that change will take place. Michael, could you switch off your mic, please, with all the noise you are doing? Oh, that's appreciated. Thank you. Do we find the idolatrous power undergoing any very marked change at the period indicated? Let us bisect the 7 times. Their length, in all, is 2,520 years. Their commencing epoch is 728 BC, and their closing epoch is 1792 BC, stretching betwixt the captivity of the 10 tribes and the French Revolution. Divided, they give 2 periods of 1260 years each, a well-known period in the Apocalypse as that of the reign of Antichrist and the prophesying of the witness in sackcloth. The bisecting year of the 7 times is the year AD 532. At that year, or about that year, ought idolatry to undergo the change here indicated. It ought to drop its pagan garb and assume its pseudo-Christian or popish form. And it ought to do so under the tutelage or auspices of the quote-unquote 10 horns, and especially of that quote-unquote horn which was to rise up and assume the presidency of the 10. Let's go back to the year 532 AD and interrogate history. When we do so, we behold the very change passing upon the civil kingdoms of Europe and especially upon the ecclesiastical system which prophecy has indicated. By AD 532, paganism has disappeared, and the great kingdom that upheld it has sunk beneath the flood of the Gothic invasion. But what do we behold? Out of the deluge that overwhelmed the pagan empire, we find the old Europe, the papal empire, emerging, not now as one Roman kingdom, but parted into 10 Romano-Germanic or Germanic kingdoms, and precisely in the year AD 532, or, to be less definite, from AD 530 to AD 533, we find Justinian, by the publication of his code and pandects, imparting to the new kingdoms the laws, the literature, and the religion of old Rome, and so recreating, as it were, the 4th beast with its power parted into 10 kingdoms or horns, its main instigator and ruler being that horn whose, quote, look was more stout than his fellows, unquote, and having the saints given into his hand for, quote, times, and the dividing of time, unquote. All this happens in the bisecting year of the 7 times, and if from the year 532 you count the times and the dividing of time, or the 1260 years, you arrive again at the grand point of convergence, 1792. Following the line from its manifest historic starting point, you are placed once more at the foot of the judgment seat. Down to that very year had Rome persecuted. She was caught, as it were, with the blood unwiped upon her hands. The revocation of the Edict of Nantes, with all its horrors, had been enacted but a century before. The exiled Huguenots, dispersed throughout all the Protestant countries, were living monuments that Rome was still persecuting the saints. All throughout the century that followed, banishments and martyrdoms were occurring in France. She was engaged in hunting the flock of the desert on the mountains of the Cevennes, and hanging their pastors when the chariot wheels of the coming judge broke in thunder upon her ear. Her edicts of proscription and massacre ceased with the Revolution. The God of the Huguenots suddenly summoned France to his bar. Here, then, is the common meeting place of the three great lines. The 7 times, commencing at the first captivity, terminate in 1792. The 2,300 years of the vision of cleansing, commencing with the pushing of the Medo-Persian ram, terminate in 1792. And the 3 times and a half of the papal horn, commencing at the Justinian era, terminate in 1792. Considering that these several lines are but different phases of the same idolatrous confederacy, we should expect that they would have a common terminating point. When the world power falls at the close of the 7 times, it must needs be that the horn that rose out of its last head should fall with it. And when these 2 blasphemous and persecuting powers fall, what should we expect but that the sanctuary which they had defiled and desolated should begin to be cleansed and rebuilt? So, I have to make a little point here. I have to stop here for a second. We didn't read. We read the book of Albert Close, The Divine Program of the World's History. And Albert Close gave us different times, different endings of the 1,203 days or year prophecy. Now here again, we come to another conclusion. James Edgar Wylie tells us that all 3 prophecies, speaking of 2,520 years, 2,300 day years, and 1,260 day years, they all end in 1792. And that is a different data than the data we got from Albert Close in his book when he spoke about, for example, as I also read in Henry Breton Guinness's Romanism and the Reformation, the reign of the papacy between 606 and 1866, and the fall of the Papal States in 1870, the opening time of the Lateran of the Council of how is it called? The Vatican Council in 1870, where the Pope was declared infallible. Yeah. Just before that happened, the Papal States were taken away by Italy, which became a republic instead of a kingdom, and the revolution that you had there, and that started in 1866 when the protecting French troops were distracted from the Vatican, were taken away from the Vatican, and they could not protect the Vatican anymore from that problem. So before we even go further, and we will continue next time in this reading here, I'm going to take a note here that we should continue reading here, maybe go a sentence or 2 back. When we are understanding the 1792 here from James Edgar Wylie, I'm not saying that this is wrong. I'm just saying that there are so many different times where you can put a starting point into in history, that of course you will have a different ending point in history. And if I'm absolutely honest with you, from what I personally think, I have the feeling that we are still in the captivity of the church. Whether we are still in the captivity of the church, because the way that I see it today, the papacy almost reigns completely supreme by the doings of the Jesuits and everything that we are confronted with in our society today. All the kings are in accordance with the whore of Rome, as Revelation chapter 17 verse 2 tells us, that the kings of the world have committed fornication with the whore, and all the people in the world have been drunk by the wine of a fornication. This to me is a complete understanding of what I have of the world that I live in today. So how is it possible that even the 1260 days would still be in working today? Well, when you take Hildebrand, Pope Gregory the Seventh, if I'm not mistaken, who lived around the time of 1070 AD, and who was really establishing the papal power on earth, when he forced the German King Henry IV to walk through Canossa, or to Canossa, in the winter, barefoot through the Alps, to ask forgiveness for not accepting the papal power on the temporal side, meaning that he has to accept that the Pope is a temporal and a spiritual leader. When you go from that time, then we are still in the 1260 days, if that is the time, because Pope Gregory VII, or Hildebrand as he is mostly called, or to be understood, was a pope who really, quote-unquote, established the kingdom of God on earth, but not the kingdom of the God of the Bible, but of his own, because the Pope is God on earth. That's at least what he proclaims. He is more stout than his fellows, right? The fourth
Right.
beast is different from all the other beasts. Where does it say, definitely, absolutely definitely, that the 1260-day year prophecy started in 538, as the Seventh-day Adventists teach, and ended in 1798? Or that it ended in a time that it ended in 1792, as James Edwin Wylie is telling us here? Or that it ended in any time after that, 1866? So if it ended in 1866, or if it ended in 1792, my question is, what time are we living in today? Aren't we living in a time of suppression? Aren't we living in a time of superior reign of the Antichrist in this world still? Maybe we have to reconsider, and the 1260-day year prophecy is still alive, and we are in it, and we just can't see it. Or why else has Jesus not come back yet?
Ooh.
I don't doubt that he will come back. I don't doubt that he maybe takes more time than just 2,000 years, but I am not that literate in the calendar to tell when what will happen or when whatever happened. I only say we have only these books to rely on, and we have our own understanding to match with it. And when I look at the Bible, what is written about the times of the ruling of the Antichrist, I don't see much difference today with how it was maybe 400 or 500 years ago. The Roman Catholic Church boasted that heretics were completely eradicated in the beginning of the 16th century. They held a council on that in 1513, and the Pope was proclaimed the unchallenged ruler of the world, no problem. And 4 years later, Martin Luther showed up, and the Reformation came into gear. And after the Reformation, you had the Counter-Reformation. And the Counter-Reformation worked from that time on to hold the Word of God down, to extinguish the Word of God in the history of the world, like they did with the persecutions in France of the Huguenots, and so on and so on and so on. I don't have to tell all the points. You know history yourself well enough. And even if the Pope lost his power, his temporal power, in the latest 1870, and he regained his temporal power with a Lateran Treaty in 1929, so then he regained his power in 1929, where does that put us in the times and the dividing of time? Where does that put us in the 2,300 days? Where does that put us in the 7 times the author writes here about? So that sometimes makes me doubt that all of these times are yet really fulfilled. Or I need to have an understanding that after the fulfilling of the time, the persecution will just go on. Because don't tell me we are not persecuted, because the biggest trouble, the biggest tribulation is still to come. And the Pope is using climate change and all other kinds of lies to force that upon all the peoples of the world. Maybe that is something to reflect about and to think about until we come again next time and for another reading of the Great Exodus by James Edgar Wylie. Those were at least my last thoughts, and of course I want to give it to my brothers in Christ, Bret and Michael, to comment on what I just said and bring this broadcast to an end today. Thanks for listening on my part, and I can only advise you to read your Bible and study for yourself, because I don't know it all, Bret doesn't know it all, Michael doesn't know it all, but God knows it all. So know what God has to say in the Bible. Maranatha.
Yeah, thank you, Jörg, for your comments, which were also my end comments, and I can now take it or hand it over to Bret.
I'm sorry, I didn't know what you wanted to say, Michael.
Yeah, it just everything has been still fulfilled according to all the writers which were mentioning or which you have mentioned before. So it's not important when it has finished the prophecy of the 2,300 years, because in any case it would be over for some years or even centuries. So what kind of time we are living in? They are telling us we are living in the age of reason. They are telling us we are in the enlightened, and they are telling us we are so educated, but it's just the other way around. We are living in the world of more and more darkness coming towards us, and we only can see some small fracture of light. And I think that this world is getting darker and darker and darker from every time and from day to day and from hour to hour. And so I'm really looking forward to have some more deep studies into that, because in every regard I have listened or I have looked up in many books, every book is telling me that these prophecies have been fulfilled and these prophecies are now finished, and so what's to come? But of course the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ, and so that no angel in the heaven and not the Son, and no one knows its arrival, and also no radio host, then it's the question, when will it happen? And will we be present at that time, or will we then have died already? But it's not that important. It's just that important that we stick to the faith and we stick to the Bible and we stick to Jesus Christ, because in the end, all that is important is the belief you are saved by grace. And so I think it's very important to stay straight, also as maybe it's important for the generation coming after us and their generation and so on, that there are some straight people out there who are spreading the word. I think that's more important than ever, because I think that people who are dealing with the real truth of Jesus Christ being the Son of God and being the Messiah, that these people are getting fewer, and we're getting less and less, because the world is persecuting these people. And I think so that's very important to spread the word. And it's just not important when it has happened or what has happened exactly, because most of the real important history will not be known to us, because they are being hidden from the Vatican and from their servants. But I think that's more important than ever, than to look forward to the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ. Yeah, and after Jesus Christ, there's nothing more to say from me than to hand it over to my brother Bret.
Yeah, before Bret takes over, I just want to show, I was just thinking of this verse in the Bible, that there should be time no more, or no longer. And this is in Revelation chapter 10, and we know that the book of Revelation is not a book that is written chronologically. So you don't start at chapter 1 and read through chapter 22 and you got it all in chronological order. No, that is not what the book of Revelation is all about. And here in Revelation chapter 10 verse 6 it says, "And swear by him that liveth forever and ever, who created heaven and the things that therein are, and the earth and the things that therein are, and the sea and the things which therein are, that there should be time no longer. Maybe we should study this, or ask our listeners to study this in that regard, that maybe we are in the time when there is no more time, when we are living in a time that is even not written on in the Bible, because the history is over and we are just in the waiting line for Jesus Christ to come back. All prophecies have been fulfilled, except of course the one that Jesus Christ has to come back. But we are in a time where time is no longer, where time doesn't matter anymore, where the Bible doesn't predict anything anymore. Just said everything is done, everything is laid out. Now the gospel is in the world, and you have to make your choice, whether you obey God or you obey man. This is the time of trial for our consciences. How about that?
Yes, Yerk. And to ponder this even further, I read from John chapter 3, verse 5. Verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man be born of water and of the Spirit, he cannot enter into the kingdom of God. That which is born of the flesh is flesh, and that which is born of the Spirit is spirit. Marvel not that I said unto thee, ye must be born again. The wind bloweth where it listeth, and thou hearest the sound thereof, but canst not tell whence it cometh, and whither it goeth. So is every one that is born of the Spirit. Again, that's the Gospel from John, chapter 3, verses 5 through 8. Some very important scripture to take into consideration, and also take into consideration studying these books that are old books. They're not new books. They've been around for 100 plus years or 200 years. There's a quote here I want to quote from Sir Robert Peel, who was quoted saying this 200 years ago today. The day is not distant, and it may be very near, when we shall have to fight the battle for the Reformation over again. Unquote.
That's a quote from Romanism and the Reformation.
Yes, brother.
One of the most wonderful books in the world, and Henry Gretton Guinness gives credit to Peel for that quotation, but he mentioned it in his book, I think even in the very beginning. Wonderful find, brother.
Yeah, no, that's been on my mind, because one of our brothers in Christ is working on translating the entire book of Romanism and the Reformation into Spanish as we speak. Mm-hmm. And he sent me a verse in a comment that Yerk just mentioned about this. What was that last verse you just mentioned, Yerk?
Revelation 10:6. There be time no longer.
Yep. That's right. And he just
swear
made
by
a comment
him that liveth forever and ever, who created heaven and the things that therein are, and the earth and the things that therein are, and the sea and the things which are therein, that there should be time no longer.
So I think we're taking a very profound look at these old books again, and we're discussing these prophecies. And certainly, I must agree with you, Yerk, there is something yet to be learned from all of us. And we're trying to put these pieces back together into a picture that we can actually look at and understand. But it's a spiritual picture. It's not a physical picture. It's difficult to try and re-establish a pure religion.
It's like, God says, it's like God says, everything is said and done. Now make up your mind.
There we go.
I told you my story. I gave you my time. I gave you my prophecy. I gave you my history. Now you have the possibility in 2019 to look back on everything else. Now make sense out of it and choose this day whom you're gonna serve.
Exactly. I think that says it all.
You see, maybe there's also one valid point to add, because the invention or the spreading of the internet makes it possible to read the book without having the book in hand. So it's also a final possibility to spread the world by recording it, by copying it, and so to read it in different languages and to translate it in your own language and this and that. And I think that's also a little bit of benefit which we would not have if the internet wouldn't have started to spread globally about 20 years ago on big scale. And so without the internet, we wouldn't have the possibilities that we are gathered together by Skype here today. And think about it, that's maybe also one big step ahead. Yeah, that's my final thoughts on it.
All right, very good. Thanks very much, Michael. Thanks very much, Jörg. Looking forward to the next reading and discussion of this very profound book. The Great Exodus, or the Time of the End. How near are we to it? We'll see you then. God bless, and bye-bye for now.
And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities. Come out of her, my people. Ere dawns that day, O people of the Lord, hear ye the final warnings of his word. Come out of Babylon, this God's command, for her foretold destruction is at hand. The rod is lifted, the avenging flame is kindled, as of the old destruction came. On Sodom and on Egypt cometh now, her end amazing, suddenly shall bow, the storm of judgment from the starry height, and at the angel's blasts the flames shall write. On the darkness, it is done, a hollow sound, as of an earthquake thundering through the ground, shall answer to the trumpet in the skies. The hills shall sink, the black abyss shall rise. And leaning over, as when the tempest heel treads down the forest, Babylon shall reel and rush to ruin. Then the mitres high, the lordly croziers, and the crowns shall lie. With broken idols, altars, temples, thrones, and mid the chorus of creation's groans, shall Babel's cursed presence and her pride perish, a milestone falling in the tide, flung by an angel's hand, descending dread down to abysmal lavas rolling red. Near is the day, near is the wrathful hour, when God shall break the silence of his power. O Antichrist, thy brow his butt shall be, when from his bow he sets his lightnings free. O Rome, and thee the blood of all the slain shall then be found, no covering shall remain. To hide thy horrors, heaven shall all display, and strip thy deeds of darkness in that day. Escape from Babylon, escape and flee, ye who would shun her woes, nor linger ye, nor backward look out from the accursed camp of these conspirators. For lo, the tramp of the avenger soundeth in the hall, the judge is at the door and on the wall. The mystic finger writes, Arise no more, bow with these doomed idolaters before their altars falls no more with these deny the temple and the sacrifice on high. Give to the Lord his glory, he alone doth mediate for men and doth atone. Abhor the priesthood that pretends to be clothed with his office and authority, Christ's holy gospel, neither more nor less, before the world with heart and voice confess. Aye, and in love unmixed with bitterness, no crucifix parade, but for the cross, count the whole world but vanity and loss. Cling to God's word, yea, take that book and be believing, blessed, fruitful, faithful, free. Come, kingdom of our God, and pass away, ye earthly kingdoms, darkness yield today. Perish, O Rome, as Babylon they fall, arise, Jerusalem, thy God is all.